Food, they say, is one of the most important needs to human being. We eat food to be happy, to stay alive, and build relationship between people. On a larger scale, food is used to drive tourism and to bring about better understanding between people from different parts of the world. Over the years, Ireland has risen from a country of very limited food choices to one that has become a food tourism destination in Europe. But can the success of Ireland as a food tourism country ever be told without highlighting the role of the new communities that have come to make Ireland their home and that came with their food and cultures, consequently turning Ireland into a multicultural society? Asheesh Dewan, owner of chains of Indian restaurants in Dublin and Wicklow, and I was first named the permanent TSB Ethnic Entrepreneur of the Year 2008, and by now the recipient of so many mainstream awards like the Michelin star, takes us on a journey of his coming to Ireland, his burning desire to succeed in the only business he knows how to do, his struggles, and finally his success in the business of food and others.
My name is Asheesh Dewan and I'm originally from India. I've been living in Ireland since 1995. I got here because my wife has lived in Ireland most of her life, and after our marriage I decided to move to Ireland. I was working in hotels in India and in South Asia, and I used to travel quite a lot with them. So essentially hoteliering or restauranting as it's known as out here is the only skill set I have. So essentially when I got here to Ireland, I had decided that come here and realize my dream. It took me about 3 years and a long arduous journey to go out and set up my first restaurant, which was Jaipur and Georgia Street in November 1998, and that was quite a turning point for me in my life and all my colleagues who helped me along that journey.
From day one, Asheesh was on a mission to change the perception of how Indian food was regarded in Ireland and the rest of Europe.
We had decided that the way Indian food was represented in Ireland and primarily in Europe was not a true representation of the food. We were not seeking to go out and do food that was truly authentic, but we had to give it a sense of place. We, after all, were cooking Indian food in an Irish context, and that's where our journey began, in changing perceptions of how food was generally perceived.
With Ireland opening their doors to immigrants and the Irish diaspora coming back to Ireland, their mission was made easier.
Certainly, when you talk about perception and change, they go hand in hand. In 1995 to 1998 to the early 2000s, Ireland was changing. A lot of Irish were coming back out here, and they were open to change. I'm not saying that any nation is not open to change, but it was a tremendous time of change. We were coming into a new millennia. Our thoughts, our processes, and our understanding of the world was growing much faster. So any change that was made in terms of even food, people were quite open and susceptible to change out there, and they did embrace it.
Their determination to excel helped to overcome the initial resistance of a people that have not seen change for a long time.
Though of course we were trying to cater to a market that had not seen change for the past 20 years and were difficult to convince. But once they saw the quality of the product and they started believing in it, I presume success followed. You might look at my journey today and think that it was easy. Nothing was easy. In the beginning, we always sort of fell into the trap that people didn't know what we were because they weren't quite used to what we were trying to do.
And traveling, they say, brings modernization.
And also, I mean, the greatest thing that happened out here is that people started traveling quite a bit. Travel became quite accessible. Ryanair had come around. We started traveling as a nation. And I presume travel really does change people's perceptions. People wanted more. People were more open to experiment, try different things. And I think that made it a lot easier for us in the later part of our journey. But the first 2 years were quite a struggle.
Time and place has overcome the type of Indian cuisine that was being sold to the people at the time, and this worried Asheesh a lot, thus the urgent need for him to set the story straight.
What I wasn't comfortable with was that the cuisine that had travelled out came into Ireland and into Europe in 1890. It really hadn't evolved for many years, and I presume it was for one simple reason, that our palates hadn't evolved. But over the years, I think cuisine got very, very lazy. So when we looked at it from a modern perspective, we thought that there was a sense of time and a sense of place to go out and re-educate the people about the variety and the depth that came with the Indian food that was served in the subcontinent, not just in India, but in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Nepal. And what was served out here was a very small snapshot, what at that stage was tailor-made to serve the local audience. There was a great assumption that people only wanted that, and people would not change something if it worked. I mean, it's a great business principle, and I understand where those people came from. It worked, so they didn't need to change, and because they didn't need to change, they ran profitable businesses. When we came down and we looked at food that was being served out here, we certainly didn't think it represented the subcontinent. It represented a part of the subcontinent that was slightly cliched and tailor-made to suit the local needs.
Jaipur is an Irish restaurant serving Indian food in Ireland.
I wouldn't consider myself an Indian restaurateur in Ireland. I would consider myself an Irish restaurateur serving Indian food in Ireland. So once you make that demarcation, what happens is that you embrace the culture of the country, and the food culture is really amazing. Food travels and has travelled for millennia.
Jaipur's services is not a fusion of Indian and Irish food, but authentic Indian food served in an Irish context.
You know, fusion is quite a confused term. Fusion is that you're trying to do it too hard. The food and the flavors that we serve in our restaurants are authentically Indian. It is just that they are being served in an Irish context. It's simple. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're coming up to Patrick's Day. You know, in 2005, somebody said to us that, what about bacon and cabbage? Now, in India, there is no tradition of bacon, but there's, you know, we cook cabbage in about 5,000 different ways. I mean, every household would cook something differently. Number one, because of the mass of the population we have, and also our cuisines are quite regional. So we did, for the Irish Times, we did up a recipe. We took an Irish cut, which is bacon, very, very traditional, and we served it with cabbage. Now, I don't think that there is an Irish person who doesn't believe in bacon and cabbage. So our beliefs are exactly the same. So for instance, if I serve a pork chop out there and I have to serve cabbage with it, the flavors in the cabbage are Indian, the flavors in the pork chop are Irish. And I presume that's what sums us up, because I think that is what you need to do with food, because we are serving Indian food in an Irish context to an international audience. And I think that is what modern food is about. It's not about fusion. Fusion can be trying too hard and you put everything together and you get a mishmash of stuff. You have to give it a sense of place, a context in which it's being served, and also you've got to go out and say true to the form of the dish. You know, I am a purist, my colleagues are purists. I mean, the people who work with me, I've been very fortunate that we have people who really believe in what they do and take those ingredients and bring them to new heights.
Food is a communal experience that is used to bring people together.
Food, I always say, bridges cultures through cuisine. I mean, that is one of the two mottos we have. We say Jaipur is authentically Indian, truly Irish, and we do bridge cultures through food. And I presume food brings everybody together. Food is a very communal experience. You know, we travel out. Very few people go out to eat on their own. So it is a communal experience. So the minimum number of people who come out to eat, other than the exception of people who travel on their own, go out in pairs or greater numbers. So the experience itself becomes quite communal. And when you're trying to drive something that is communal, you have to bring about change into that. And I presume if you look back at even our journey as to where we started off, you know, we had a vision for the product in its original format. But we had to go out and tailor it to suit our audience. And the more confidence our customers had in us, the more they let us experiment with our own food and bring out newer stuff. And it wasn't a revolution that took place overnight. It was a slow revolution. It took about 6 to 8 years.
The Indian food franchise is not commercial at the moment, but cultural and unifying.
A model that we've never looked at, for the very simple fact is that I have a simple business principle that a business is successful as long as every individual within the team has complete ownership of the business and they have a belief system that lets them go out and understand they're an integral part of the team. In a franchise, I presume, and that's my view, I mean, there are big franchises that are extremely successful. They're franchise, I mean, the most successful franchise model is McDonald's, KFC. They're right beside us, and I presume they work very, very well. But in our context, because we are so immersed in what it is and our food is so subjective that it hasn't been standardized yet to go out and franchise it. But apart from the franchises, what I would say is that the growth that we've had, we've got tremendous amount of Indian restaurants that are mushroomed around here, and every place that I go to are ex-colleagues of ours. I mean, I can go to Cork, we can go to Tipperary, I can go to Waterford, I can go anywhere. I mean, let alone that, we can go to Norway, we can go to London, we can go to Australia, we've got to go to Canada. And to think that they've all sort of worked with us in Ireland and have gone out and conquered the world is a tremendous thing, because I think that's what this is about. Now, is that a global franchise model? I would say, well, it is a franchise of some sort, but our franchise is not commercial. Our franchise is, it's cultural, it binds us together, and it lets us exchange ideas and sort of go out and benefit the growth of good Indian food globally, not just in Ireland.
The success of Jaipur Restaurant is obvious in their 4 outlets in Dublin. Ananda epitomizes the Jaipur heritage of taste and excellence.
No, we've got 4 outlets in Ireland. We've got 1 in Malahide, 1 in Dundrum, 1 in Dalkey, and 1 in Greystones. So the flagships that we had was in Georgia Street. We closed it down in 2015 because the building was sold. I mean, it pains me at times that it still lies vacant, but I presume it's a commercial decision of the person who bought the building. And we were there. I mean, I was very fond of that place. But our flagship now is Ananda, which is sort of not only known in Ireland, but it's also known globally for its great food. And yet again, we've got the other restaurants that compete with the best restaurants in the world. I mean, we've got Michelin recognition across the board, which I presume not only bodes well for us, but also bodes well for every individual working in the thing. Now, I remember when Michelin recognized George Street in 2001, 2002, it was a leap of faith that they took in the consistency of our product. And I presume I'd say this is 20 years today. In November we'll be 20 years in the business. And I presume it's a tremendous thing to go out and say that for 20 years we've gone out and done great things across the board. I mean, we've had to close 2 restaurants, and that was not by choice. I mean, we had to surrender the leases on both those buildings.
Asheesh went nostalgia when talking about the outlets at Georgia Street that he had to close through no fault of his.
To tell you, in fact, most restaurants, most businesses would have parties to open a business. We had a party that closed Jaipur and Georgia Street because it was such an institution. It wasn't, I mean, I didn't call it an institution, but it's an institution in the city, in its growth. And we had about 300-400 people who were customers, people who were passionate about it, and 2 years later, we still get calls to say that, listen, I'm standing outside this restaurant, why aren't you open? It's still, the name's gone off the door, but the building is such a high impact building, and I presume that is the sense of impact. And sometimes it gives you a tremendous amount of joy that you've left, not a legacy, but you've left a mark on a city or on a nation that people still regard and want that back out there. I think gives me tremendous joy.
Ireland was still like a transit point to the UK in 1995. To 2001.
It is, people don't understand it. From 1995 to 2001, I presume there were very few foreigners in this country. The new Irish hadn't started arriving yet. We were on the cusp of the tech revolution. Our bubble had already burst. We had a few people in out here. A couple of people would always come in out here, but the big draw was always the island next door to us, because globally, everybody who came to Ireland had a relative down in the UK, and it was the natural draw. So Ireland was almost the sort of transient stop for the UK, and eventually people would come. So for instance, if you talk about the Indian community when I got here, there were a constant 1,800 people here. The Indian community in Northern Ireland was larger than the Indian community in Southern Ireland. I mean, it was quite, you'd often wonder why a smaller part of Ireland had more Indians than, but I presume it's not a question that it wasn't a conducive place to be, but I presume UK had greater opportunities.
But the explosion of immigrants after 2001 marks a turning point in Irish history.
Till 2001, I presume, if you walked down Grafton Street and you saw a foreigner, you'd sort of acknowledge each other. And then I presume what happened after that was a lot of people came down here. I mean, there were people from Africa who came out here, people from Asia who came out here, from Philippines. I mean, it became a melting pot, every time. And as time went by, and I think close to 2005, we peaked, and I presume then we had the new Europeans come here.
The impact of the new Europeans cannot be overemphasized, as they have contributed a lot, both to the food and culture that now exist in Ireland.
I mean, people underestimate the impact that the new Europeans have made into this nation in terms of food, in terms of culture. Polish today is the second most spoken language. I presume when you have so many Polish speakers out here, it does have an impact. If you go into a supermarket, I presume you can see the impact. The German supermarkets now sort of cater to them. And if you take the case of the humblest product that every Irish household had was a sausage. And I give this analogy a lot of times. I would say that the sausage has evolved so much from the time that the new Irish have arrived in this country, because even the sausage, which was traditionally the Irish sausage that we love, we all have grown to adore, has evolved, that it has got varietals. I mean, you can have a German, you can have an Italian, you can have umpteen amounts of sausages out here when we had a choice of three. And I presume if you take the simplest of the ingredients and then you look at it, you'd see the impact that it has had.
The monocultural island has overnight changed to a multicultural society.
I remember meeting somebody out there, and there was an American person who'd come down to interview us, and they'd asked me the same question in 2005, and I said, listen, I'll show you what the impact of this sort of tremendous nation has been out there. And I said, if you stood outside the restaurant and you heard everybody passing by, the common binding language is English. And I said, when you hear the chatter on the street, it is so multicultural. And I presume that I said the tourists were coming and going. The number of tourists never sort of decreased. I know we've got a tremendous growth spurt in tourism, but out here. But essentially what you would see is that the chatter on the street had changed. Ireland overnight became a truly multicultural nation, and I presume we've only had a great impact of that, wherein I presume you can see the fruits of it all, that we eat well, we sort of study well, and we're going to go out and travel well. And I think that's the greatest impact that it's had from a nation that had very few people from abroad. I mean, invariably, people would ask, are you a doctor out here? Because the only people they saw, foreigners coming out here, would come down to the College of Surgeons. There were a few professors in Trinity, and everybody else went about their business. Unlike the UK, which was a neighbouring island, which was truly multiple. But listen, we were only 10 or 12 years behind, or 20 years behind, but we've caught up at a great rate.
The attitude of the Irish towards immigrants is that of hesitant and not of suspicion.
There certainly were. I mean, when we talk about a monocultural society, going from a monocultural society to being a multicultural society, the impact of that has been sort of very positive here. I mean, you do hear about a lot of negative impact of all of that, but I presume we don't tend not to talk about it, because really, when you scrape the surface, and I'll tell you, I mean, it's all right when people do ask me that, have I gone through any bit. There is an underlying feeling of sort of being, it's not being suspicious of it, but it's just that you often sort of are quite inquisitive about it. And I presume what the Irish people do very well is that they don't have that sort of same awkwardness about asking the question. People are very open in conversation, I presume, and that's the greatest thing we've had, that integration has been so smooth and easy out here, because, people are inquisitive, people open barriers, they talk, there's a common binding language that we have, which makes integration a lot easier. were people suspicious of us? Were people suspicious of my intentions? I've never thought so. I mean, I'd be like, whatever, I was running a restaurant. And even if I was working, if I was doing anything else that other people do, I don't think anybody was suspicious of anything. They might have been hesitant. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of hesitancy. Sometimes you don't know how to ask the question. I mean, like I said, people did ask me, whether you're from Pakistan, are you from Bangladesh, are you from, like I said, you could be from anywhere. I mean, it's all they could have. And sometimes these, asking about somebody's identity, I think is the greatest opening line that you could ever have. I mean, it's never been a chat-up line, but I presume what it does is that it opens up a conversation. And I think the greatest ease that this nation has is that there is tremendous art of conversation, and the extroverts tend to thrive out here.
Why Asheesh believed that integration is a two-way process. He's quick to note that most Irish are thrilled with the new multicultural island, celebrating the food and cultures that came with it.
Food, like I said earlier, is some place that breaks down barriers. If you could answer a question about identity, if you could do it through food, you'd never have a problem, because food is quite straightforward. Either you like something, you don't like something, but there's always a conversation about why we don't like a particular thing or why we like a particular thing. So if you take the same analogy and you apply it to society, and you say, well, you asked me the question earlier about was Ireland inclusive? Could they cope with the number of people who came out here? Did we feel isolated as migrants out here? I would say that state systems might have failed the migrant, and they continue to fail the migrant. But they are systems of the state. But that is just one part of what we live our lives in. We live our lives in society. The Irish person, has embraced multiculturalism with open arms. I'm sure there are pockets where this is not something that they would sort of embrace. There might be issues, people would talk about stuff. But essentially what has happened is that if you look at where England was 20 years ago, or 20 to 30 years ago, and when they talk about exclusions, right? Whether it was the Irish, whether the Indians, people were excluded by caste, creed, culture, religion. Ireland has none of that. If you look at the nation today, we don't exclude everybody. It's a very inclusive society. And like I said, integration is a two-way process. I must need to have the choice to integrate. I must choose to integrate into a society as much as society should integrate with me. And I presume we've hit a very, very good balance out here. And I presume the fruit of this, I always say that we might not see the true strength of this multicultural nation till about 2024, when I presume, it takes 20 years. 2004, 2005, we peaked at migration. I presume there'll be a generation ready to take on the world as the new Irish. And I think that's going to be really, really exciting. I'm not saying it's not exciting today, but it's just that that'll be times when we'll be truly, truly integrated.
The negative experience was more of not knowing what to make of the exodus of people into Ireland, coupled with not having enough for everyone.
When you talk about a journey, essentially what happens in a journey is that you would see as to where we came from. So I would say clearly till about 2001 and early 2002, we were quite monocultural here. I've seen 7 years of monocultural peace. You went out anywhere, you stood out in the crowd. Now, when you stop standing out of a crowd, people start noticing more numbers of you around. Whatever shape, creed, color they've come out in, whether you're black, brown, grey, purple, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, what happened is that we had such a sudden influx in 3 years that all the reactions, when you talk about the negative part of the journey, and I know there was tremendous about negative parts of the journey, and I'm not trying to brush it under the carpet. The negative part of the journey was a knee-jerk reaction of a nation of people who did not know what to do with it. You could, like a village that had never seen somebody from outside now had 5 foreigners in it. Because the only other town that they had seen somebody from outside was about 30 miles away, now had come at the doorstep. They didn't know what to do with it. So neither did the person who was landed out there, because, isolation. What happens is that if the only place I could go out and find a job was 70 miles out and away from everybody else, I'd also feel isolated. And I presume what happens is that essentially, till the time, I always say to people, till the time you don't get at the pub, you tend not to integrate. But that's not the case today.
Food, in the face of all these, has been the celebratory weapon to break down barriers.
A lot of people who've come out here don't drink. Their cultures don't allow them to drink. So then what happens is that food becomes an integral part of it. You go past a house. I always say this analogy. When you move into a new neighborhood, you go past a house and everybody says, oh, there's an awful smell coming out of that house out there. So you know there's a new person on the street. But having said that, eventually, if you partake in that aroma that comes out of that house and you get to eat as to what is generating that aroma, you say, well, God, that's wonderful. We must do that at home. And once it becomes a staple, if you take a simple thing like, chicken, we all cook it in very different ways. I remember, there were initially people would say, oh, well, it was an awful smell coming out of the apartment because the guys used to cook fish. Well, they're cooking fish in their own particular way, and whichever way it is, because, tilapia is not a fish that is caught in the Irish waters. The way the Irish cook their fish is very, very simple. It leaves no aroma out there, and anything they had to deal with was dealt outside the house. Now, when you look at fish today and you talk about a simple ingredient like that, we expect it to be cooked in so many different ways. We ourselves cook it in so many different ways. And I presume we have got accustomed to the fact that fish can be smelly. And I think that's what food does to cultures, that what we abhor at the beginning, once we partake in it, we become a part of it. We either like it or we hate it. There are a lot of people who would still walk past some place and say, well, absolutely detest that smell. But there are a lot of people who also say, well, that's really, really nice. It smells awful, but it tastes good. And I always tell people, I give them the analogy. I said, why is Thai food so popular? I said, if I sat you under a bottle of fish sauce, you'd throw up. But if it was added little by little into your curry, you tend to enjoy it. That's what it is. There is umami in food, and there is also umami in cultures. You take, you've got 4 flavor senses, but it is the bitter that adds the extra element to it. So initially, I presume when you look at the migrant, you might say, well, if it's a very resistant society, the migrant is the bitter pill who arrives at their doorstep. But essentially, when he becomes a fabric of that part of society, that bitterness adds that extra dimension to it. It might be underlying, it might be overtones, or whatever else it is. It can be on 2 ends of the spectrum. But what it does, it essentially provides something and becomes a part of it. And I presume that's the whole thing. And I know in the journey, and I always say that use bitter as a flavor. Don't use it as being a negative connotation to anything. And I think that's what it does.
Jaipur's strategy was that of creating a difference that it paid a high price for.
You have to create a point of difference. And, as a businessman, you tend to say, well, what is the thing? So we were surrounded by 5 pubs and we were not serving any beer. Now, I know for a fact that I had to go out, I had a bee in my bonnet about demystifying curry and lager. So we started serving only wine in our restaurant. Now, wine wasn't very top of the agenda of Indian food, or just food in general. Wine was, and everybody would come down to us and say, well, why don't you serve beer? So the only people we were missing out were the English guys who would come out there. But essentially, when we told people that, listen, we've got the Long Hall, one of the most famous pubs out there, we've got the Bamboo, we were surrounded by 4 bars. 2 of which still exist. I said, go down and have a pint out there, and everybody did meet out there and they come down out there, and they did all of that. We were not trying to be different because we thought we had to create a point of difference. We were trying to be different because we wanted to be noticed in that journey. And yet again, 3 years later, we were serving beer and wine together. And from a business point of view, I thought I was the biggest fool on earth not to serve beer at the beginning. But also became a point of difference. Sometimes you do things, you stick by your principle and say, no, I'm not going to do it. But eventually, I think business teaches you the greatest experiences. When they say fail and fail early and fail often and learn from your mistakes, if we had gotten beer at the very beginning, we wouldn't have struggled through to become what we became. And if we didn't have those struggles, I presume our business model would have been completely different. And it is not that people notice us, it is just that people started talking about it. And I presume there was a place wherein somebody went down and he said, if you're going to an Indian restaurant and looking, I still remember the article which said that, listen, if you're looking for any beer in this Indian restaurant, you better go down to have your beer in those 2 pubs because they don't serve any. Now everybody would have if they had written the article, it might have sort of gone unnoticed. But somebody did stand up and take notice. And people did take notice. Why do they not serve any beer? And it became a talking point. It became a point of difference. And then we thrived on that. And the same thing, the same questions were asked. And, I presume it irritated all my colleagues.
Jaipur is grateful to his loyal staff and the Irish community that have made his business successful.
People who were working for us didn't come from India. We had 4 chefs and all 4 of them are still with me. 20 years later, they're still our colleagues of mine, work with us, are an integral part of the business. But the people working the floor were all Irish. And they used to say, God, my granny used to say, this and that. And they brought their parents in, they brought people in who hated it, and to say that, listen, you have to come down and you have to try this. This is not the same as the other stuff you've tried out. So the point of difference and all the encouragement that came for people to eat out here did not come from Indians, because we had none of those. We had the Irish people, the locals, who were encouraging their friends and their families to come down and try this different place.
The eating habit in Ireland is evolving as young people have started eating out, and the diversity is becoming very exciting.
Anybody who lives around the area, or people who travel out to us, or foreigners, tourists, but bread and butter, 90% of the people are the Irish. And even in the past 4 years, I presume, we've seen a lot of change in people's eating habits. A lot of young people have started eating out again, and they come in groups, and you can see now that on a single table there could be 5 or 6 different nationalities. It might be 2 Irish and 4 foreigners. It could be, and when I talk about, they're the new Irish. They're people, new Europeans, people who think that there are no boundaries out here. And that's the wonderful thing, that, you come up here for work, you could be working with Microsoft. They were saying the other day that Microsoft had 211 nationalities working out there. Isn't that fantastic? I think that is the greatest sort of token to Ireland, is that it'll be so multicultural that it'll be a wonderful place.
When determination and hard work is rewarded with recognition and award, it is most of the time very motivating.
I would say, sitting out here today, there are not many awards that have eluded us till date. We've won, apart from, we used to have a category for ourselves called the World Cuisine, which we thought was okay, and my colleagues, my restaurants in different teams have gone down and won every single award. We've been the Ethnic Restaurant of the Year for many occasions. We tend to compete within our own restaurants. We've won the Best Service Award. We've won the Best Restaurant Award. We've also won the Best Chef Award. We've been recognized by Michelin. We've been recognized by a lot of credible guides in Ireland. People, lots of food writers who run awards have put us up in the top 100 lists or whatever else it is. So I presume it's not, we strive for excellence, and if the awards come along the journey, it really makes your journey quite fulfilling. It's great for the team. And on a personal level, yes, I've gone down and won quite a few awards. I've won a Lifetime Achievement Award with the Food Mine Awards out here, which is very, I got that 6 years ago. 2012, 2011. I had not only done what I had done out here, I'd also replicated the same thing in the UK. I've since sold my businesses at that stage. In 2008, 2009, I won sort of the Entrepreneur of the Year in 2008, and I won the Ethnic Entrepreneur of the Year in 2009. Those were great days. We were doing great things.
The ambition to expand comes with success. As Jaipur Restaurant grows, Asheesh has over the years developed interest in other businesses.
Food was one part of my journey. Once I understood business, I got involved in a couple of other businesses. So I was running a technology business. I was running restaurants on a consultancy basis in Mauritius, in India. I'd opened a restaurant down in London, in Mayfair, that did exceedingly well. We expanded out. Went in 2012, 2013. I decided I had to call time on it, because there was only one of me, and there's only that much you could do. And I think my journey was complete at that stage, wherein I thought that the businesses that I had created were being left in great hands. All those businesses still exist, and they're still doing well, and still look after families, still feed them. They've people who've been with me have gone out to win even greater awards than me, which I presume gives you a tremendous sense of accomplishment.
The Jaipur Group caters for big events all over the country.
Absolutely. We've cooked for everybody. We've cooked, in hotels, for weddings. We've cooked at the Mansion House. We've cooked at the RDS. We've cooked for the Web Summit. We used to provide lunch to. We still do. I mean, we provide lunch to businesses out here to give them a flavor of our food. A couple of multinational companies, without sort of naming them out here. Our team goes out. The greatest thing that has come out of all of that is that we now cater to weddings. Out of that, for the very simple fact is that people in these companies have seen what we bring to the table, what we do, and they'd come down, and there's a lot of intercultural marriages that are taking place. Because when Ireland tends to showcase food, they also put our food alongside it, for the very simple fact is that we are an Irish product. I mean, the Jaipur Group exists in Ireland. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. I mean, the Chakra, Ananda, Jaipur, they are an Irish product, and that's why I presume, to give it variety and diversity, I presume they showcase this everywhere, wherever there's a food showcase, whether it's the RDS. We do something called the Taste of Dublin every year, and we're quite popular, we're quite busy out there, and we do well with it, and it's tremendous. I mean, it's great going, we like it, and I presume it also gets us out of, the monotony of working in a restaurant and in a kitchen. As exciting as it is at times, it's also very monotonous. So it's great for the team to get out and showcase their skills and do different things, which is fantastic.
Their involvement in food festivals has again helped to showcase their strength and expertise.
It's a big food festival. It's called the Taste of Dublin. Taste festivals take place around the world. Whether cities like London, Dubai, Madrid, Canada, New York, Mumbai, Singapore. So the guys go out and showcase all of that. I presume we have ours in Dublin. We were there for the first one, which is on a small scale in Dublin Castle, which has now grown, and I think it's going to be in its 13th year of existence out here this year. And we're doing it again this year, which is a great draw for us. And it gets not only to showcase our food to people who come to our restaurants, but also sort of gives us an opportunity to showcase the food to people who don't dine with us and just come down to that place. So it's great.
Food help to interpret different cultures, and at the end, break down the barrier of strangeness.
I always say, food bridges cultures through, creates harmony and bridges cultures through its own existence, any amount of food. So you must remember that if you look at the history of migration of the world, there are people who've left everything behind. There are people who travel with nothing, but they travel with two things: food memories and a recipe in their head, and they seek those ingredients. If you look at a single protein, wherever you and I have come from, what we've traveled with is, we go into the unknown not knowing what to expect, but when we find it, we make it our own. And I think that is the greatest contribution food makes, is that it bridges cultures and creates tremendous amount of harmony. Food, I always say, bridges cultures through cuisine. I mean, that is one of the two mottos we have. We say Jaipur is authentically Indian, truly Irish, and we do bridge cultures through food. And I presume food brings everybody together. Food is a very communal experience. We travel out. Very few people go out to eat on their own. So it is a communal experience. So the minimum number of people who come out to eat, other than exceptional people who travel on their own, go out in pairs or greater numbers. So the experience itself becomes quite communal. And when you're trying to drive something that is communal, you have to bring about change into that. And I presume if you look back at even our journey as to where we started off, we had a vision for the product in its original format. But we had to go out and tailor it to suit our audience. And the more confidence our customers had in us, the more they let us experiment with our own food and bring out newer stuff. And it wasn't a revolution that took place overnight. It was a slow revolution. It took about 6 to 8 years.
Passion and commitment will take you far in the food business.
Yeah, listen, it's the greatest thing. You hear all the successful people saying that, the harder you work, the more successful you get. And I presume it's exactly the same for every individual. I mean, it's true in a workplace, it's true in business, it's true across the world. I mean, there is no replacement for hard work and commitment and passion. A lot of people are very, very passionate about it, right? Passion is one part of it. being talented is another part of it. So you've got passion, you've got talent, and then you've got hard work, and then you've got commitment. Now, you could be exceptionally passionate, exceptionally talented, and you might just last a couple of years as a spark and go away. You add a little bit of hard work to it, you could stay a little longer, right? But if you're committed to it and you're willing to learn from it, I presume you can get enough joy and success about it, not only for yourself, but also for the opportunity for everybody in the business to go out and do exactly what you've done and replicate your journey. I presume so. Those are quite essential ingredients, and some people are exceptionally talented. I mean, there's a sense of time and place. Some people, get lucky at times and go out and create great things. Who would have thought that two guys selling salad leaves on healthy food can have 150 stores? I mean, look at the young guys who started Chopped. One of the boys is a new migrant out there. I mean, he's not selling Chinese food. You'd expect a young Chinese migrant to go out and send. He's selling salad out here, and two of those guys, because they were fitness guys out there, one came from a food background, and the other guys have come together and created something wonderful out there. So, everybody says, oh, well, they're extremely lucky. They were only lucky because, number one, they took the chances, and secondly, they worked very hard at it. And if they've gone from 1 to 150 in 3 years, good luck to them, and you want more of those. I mean, want far more of those people to be successful. I'd hate to see somebody in my journey that you go out and say, well, how do you measure success? I mean, do you measure it over 1 year? Do you measure success over 10 years? Do you measure it over a lifetime? Do you measure it by the results that you produce every year? I mean, it's a way of looking at success. I mean, at the end of the day, money is just one part of it. You've got to go out and look at legacy as an essential part of it, and encouraging other people. I think encouraging other people to do what you've done and do it better, I think is the greatest sort of success anybody can ever have.
The Jaipur CEO says that there has been a tremendous evolution and revolution of food in Ireland.
You would not imagine today, you walk into shops, you walk into a Spar, you walk into a Centra. I walked into something the other day, somebody was selling edible tea leaves. People see Greek food, we see Nigerian food, we see Indian food, we see Nepalese food, we have Filipino ingredients, we have ingredients from Poland, we have ingredients from Latvia. Like, we were my favorite used to be dumplings, and I think one fine day I walked into a Latvian shop, and I presume I was told that all they eat are them dumplings formed a staple part of their diet.
He observed that food has boosted tourism potentials in Ireland.
Food does encourage tourism, because once people know that they get great food all around the country, wherever they travel to, it encourages people to come out. And I think from a nation that was known for pubs and a good time, we've come to be known as a nation of pubs with good food, with great restaurants, little cafes, and I presume that has encouraged a lot of people to travel out here. There are food trails, there are food journeys, all along the west, the east, the south, and the north. I presume there's a tremendous revolution going on. And in the past 5 to 6 years, especially since the recession, I think we've come such a long way. We've taken, I think, the quality of the produce and the quality of the product in this country has gone about 10 to 15 years ahead in time, and we can compete with the best cities in the world, be it Copenhagen, be it London, be it New York. I think the entire nation's out there. I mean, you can eat as well as in Waterford as you can eat in Belfast, or you could be in Derry. I mean, every city, every little village, every little town has one eatery that they boast about that is so good that people will travel out to it. And I think that is a fantastic revolution, and I'd call that a food revolution in this country. And we're very fortunate to be a part of it. We played a very small part, but certainly we feel that we've contributed tremendously.
The Jaipur CEO, Asheesh Dewan, is delighted to be part of those that brought about food revolution in Ireland.
I've been very fortunate to be part of the 20-year-old food revolution that has taken place. It was difficult to get a cup of coffee in 1995, 1998. All you got was just a pot of tea, a black coffee. And I think the same happened to food as well. And I presume what the recession has done to us is that it has encouraged a lot more people to get into the food business. It has made the food business very, very accessible. And I presume it has made people from all around the world embrace the new identity of Irish food, that Ireland is a food island today. We have the best produce in the world, and we produce the best of everything. But in the earlier days, the best of everything had to go out and travel out of this country to achieve a price. Today, I presume there are enough purveyors of good food that make sure that the produce, the best of the local produce, is showcased in this country. Be it a little cafe or be it us out here, our suppliers are local. We tend to go out and find local suppliers today. I remember in 1998, when we opened our thing, close to 70% of all our produce came from Holland and UK. And that is down, we've reversed that thing. Today only 30% of our produce comes from abroad, and that is only because we run an ethnic restaurant. I think that is the biggest leap of faith we've taken out here, that as an island, we produce great stuff that is used in cafes, restaurants.
And has the curry come of age to compete with the burger and the steak?
I always say that there was a celebration all along. So if let's go back. I presume if you want to sort of complete the journey experience, we need to go back in time. So every pub in this city that was serving a carvery served a chicken curry on a. Today, every pub around the country serving food serves some form of a curry every single day, and it's on their menu. And I presume if you ask those guys serving that stuff, it will be the first or the second top selling dish within the thing. So when you look at the food journey, I presume what an ingredient, a simple thing like a curry has done is that it has evolved into something better of its own original form, and yet has managed to stay without getting dated. It is there on menus, it's there out there, and it'll continue to stay out there. So it might be a Chinese curry, which has moved to an Indian curry, which has moved on to a Thai curry, will move on to an Indonesian curry, but it'll always be there, which means that the palate will always demand something different. And if it's in the form of a curry, there's joy and happiness in that. And I presume that is the indexation of how food will evolve all the time. There's another big revolution coming of artificial meat or whatever else it is. We'll see how burgers are going to be made, how people are going to question stuff or whatever else it is. But till that time, like I said, if a curry can compete with the burger and the steak, then the only thing is that it is here to stay. Food also, popularity of food is also cyclical, and people will innovate constantly to make sure that it stays on there. And I think that is quite hopeful.
The prospect of Indian food is now brighter than ever before. The next 5 years is one of tremendous opportunities.
Where do I see Indian food? I presume there's never been a better time for Indian food in this country. Because one thing is there's tremendous opportunity still lying outside Dublin. In the greater Dublin area, Indian food is served very well by restaurateurs. I would say in the next 5 years, that the growth potential of Indian food outside Dublin is going to be tremendous. People will realize that there are people, of course they don't have the population, but again, lifestyle Indian restaurants are going to pop up, I would say, in Cork, in Galway, in Kilkenny, in Waterford, in Limerick, everywhere, wherein they would go out and have new sort of Indian restaurateurs or Irish restaurateurs today, because the only thing that they will be defined as Indian because they'll be serving Indian food is that they would go out and do something so special that they will be able to do make ends meet in 5 days as opposed to 7 days. I presume if they can do that, the country is still on for the taking. Our population is growing. There are not a lot of new people out there, and I think Indian food is sort of cut out to be on the cusp of a great revolution, wherein I presume for the first time there are people who are educated, who are embedded, and aspire to go out and create new niches out there, new partnerships, new relationships, and I presume that'll grow and grow.
Mr. Asheesh Love for the island of Ireland is a perfect place to conclude a meeting with one of the food revolutionaries in Ireland.
Yes, this is a food island. It is the best place to live and work. I mean, this is the only country I'd like to live in. I'd want my children to grow up here, and they are going to grow up here. It's home for them. It's home for me. I'm torn between two islands, but on a positive note, I mean, like I said, there isn't a better island in the world made yet. They might be making one somewhere else in the world that we don't know of, but I presume this is a great place to be.